Hey everyone, I'm here. If you all are, hey, for those of you who could join in, thank you so much for your patience, y'all. I appreciate it. How are we all doing?
All right.
Okay, all right, and a thumbs up, great. Any exciting news, world events, things you're interested in other than the debate?
Kind of, not necessarily related to the debate, but I was reading an article that said that California has like the highest early turnout, I don't know, rate or something like that. Like just more people are coming out to vote than like before or something like that. I don't know. I'm kind of forgetting details.
Have you noticed more? And I personally have noticed more, and that's only because I've been through other elections before when I have been voting. But I was thinking that this morning about the dialogue or the idea of voting and how much that messaging has perpetuated in this election in particular. Voting campaigns have always been addressed to like the younger demographic, things like MTV, this idea of like P. Diddy a long time ago did a thing called Vote or Die. That was like a super long time ago, and it was a big campaign, and it was getting individuals to vote. And then like Rock the Vote came before that, where rock and roll like started to participate and like generated. But even larger campaigns like that still didn't generate the kind of age group that I believe this type of campaign and this time around is running. What do you think that is a result of?
I just think this whole election has been very controversial, and with the help of like social, even though social media was around for the last election round, I think the stakes, like people are starting to see the consequences and that the stakes are higher, and that a lot of the things that are at stake is like, topics that people feel strongly about, and they really want to participate in making sure that they continue to enjoy privileges or fight for them. So it's just overall like really, like, I don't know, it's like really motivational. And I think that like all the advertisements of people saying go out and vote, not necessarily like vote for this or that, but it's just like vote, is really starting to resonate with people.
Right. Has there been anything, and you may be more familiar with this than I, in terms of campaigns that you've been aware of? I know that there's like the idea of like naked voting, like there was that push, right? Or something like not naked, but like when celebrities like got naked to encourage the vote type thing. Was there something like that? Did you see this? Okay, so Mason, there you are. That would be an interesting play, even if you're thinking about that for like, and I know it's silly, but like even a visual pleasure theory, right? how do we start to turn the idea that we should be looking at these gays that sex sells, and then how do we start to look at that and combine it with this idea of voting? I don't know if there's like something about visual pleasure there, but I could of course like look into that more. But that's interesting. Yeah, it's like typically because it's a male gaze, I'm not quite sure how it does it, but we could look at that one if you wanted. But that is interesting. If there is some kind of younger like campaign or a campaign that you've seen in terms of voting that has been more relevant, even like within your social media or with you notice within like your generation, that may be something really interesting to look at, even like from a rhetorical perspective, or see how their language has been used, see how their imagery has been used, what has been the continual like theme that they've been pushing forward in order to have your ears in your particular demographic pop up a little bit more, to be more interested. So yeah, that's something really great to examine. Anybody else find something fun that they wanted to chat about, or that you were like, oh?
I guess it also ties into politics, doesn't it all? But
personal
I think it
and
was
political.
yeah.
All happening.
Don't remember, I forgot what day it is this week, it's been so long, but I think it was a couple days ago. I know Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joined like a Twitch stream, and she was like streaming on Twitch for like a good couple hours with some pretty big name streamers and YouTubers and whatnot, to get out that message of like, you know, like young voters, like kind of drill that home, especially with like a couple weeks out from the election. And it was fun. It like, I think she broke a few records for like what she did. So yeah, it was pretty
that
fun.
would be interesting to look at too. Like what, I mean, she draws you in, right? So if we were looking at a rhetorical situation, she draws you in, but then what themes were brought up during that time? Like what are her, like what is like the themes there? Is it like agency, or is it freedom, or is it like using your voice? Like who knows?
Yeah.
But the fact that she's breaking records says that she's saying something. She's kind of an interesting one to look at already.
I was thinking about, I don't know, just because like I've been having trouble kind of picking an artifact, but I was thinking that even for like symbolic convergence, because there is like a rhetorical vision there in terms of like kind of like getting out to vote, and I forgot what that would exactly align with, but I don't know, just thinking my ideas, like that would be a pretty interesting thing to, I guess, analyze.
Yeah, I wonder also how, I mean, she's been also so framed as somebody who is like this iconic mover within, like, again, not to say your generation, but a younger generation of up and coming Democrats, if you will. That almost, how do we start to then create her as somebody that we want to emulate as well? And how younger, yeah, are being like kind of brought into that. That is an interesting one. But yeah, all those things would be fun to look at with her. And I can of course like walk you through some ideas if you wanted to look at that today as well. Anything else somebody wanted to throw out, and then we can try to relate? All right. Wow. Smart cookies. This time is for you. I did and was thinking about a couple things here to go over today, but I also want to know where you're at. How many of you have yet to come up with like an artifact, or like just by a show of hands? Okay. Okay. Anybody have an artifact but don't know how to do anything with it? All right. So, okay. So, okay, fantastic. So we have that one. So Valentina, that's a unique like niche. What is your artifact? Is it something that was like, oh my gosh, it drew me in?
I have used Survivor in a lot of comm studies related projects and it's always worked out for me, and I really love Survivor, so I was like, why not?
Survivor, great. So, and Survivor is great too, if there's a specific season or if there's a specific episode, but were you looking at maybe what perspective to look at it through?
Yeah, so I had a couple ideas, but they're all really similar, and I don't really know if they work out either. So I think I just need like guidance of like how to choose like a theory to analyze, and then I can go from there because I have a lot of random survivor knowledge. So I'll know like what like season to choose or maybe what episode to choose, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. Because you can look at a lot of different things, even if you want. I mean, yeah, you can look at the tribes themselves. You can look at Jeff Probst as the like, you know, a sanctioning agent. You can look at like there's so many interesting ways to do that, or like by voting out lets us know what is and what isn't accepted. There's so many good, but also what brings the tribe together. And I think that Survivor has a really great way of doing those commonalities and those common things that make us feel comfortable with Survivor and make us like part of a team and make them part of a team at the same time. Things like, of course, like your bandanas of like what you know, reward. Like the provisions that you're given, so many different things. Yeah. Let me do this. There's two things that I was thinking of when I was thinking about y'all and writing this paper and making sure that you understand a couple of things. So let me share with you. I've written out some ideas. This was just, of course, me going, you know, ADD crazy today. So the main thing I want you all to remember here is this. We do not have all of the elements in our back pocket yet. We don't have all the resources of rhetoric. We don't have all the theories and perspectives. Now, probably you have them from other classes and such, but the only thing I want you to worry about applying right now are those things of which we do in fact know. Don't I say this because things like a visual pleasure analysis more than likely is going to be grounded, like we know, in feminist theory, since it's predominantly looking at how we view things. Oftentimes individuals will say, how will this impact issues of like gender, sexuality, etc. You are not required to bring up any feminist theory within that paper. However, you can talk about like the implications that you believe would happen, because we know that like when a woman is exposed to this visual this many times, this potentially could happen, or the possibility of being exposed to violence this much could in fact have that same idea. But I simply want you to know that one, you don't have to do anything beyond what we've learned. The other thing, this paper can be a simple analysis of an artifact or a piece. It does not need to make like a persuasive claim and then like seek to persuade us. You do not need to write like an argument. Because it's analysis, it's really going to give you're going to represent to us what you are already seeing, and you're going to pick apart all little elements of it that make it reveal whatever that theme is telling us. And I've written out a couple, and I wouldn't call them research questions because I started with the question of the how or the why or the what, but ultimately I've tried to write some examples of like themes that you could do, also taking some themes that I've had before in the past. John, you encouraged me to go back and look at some ideas and like figure out how to work these. And so to show you how you can make the like thesis statement, if you will, or like your preview statement, and keep it at a really easy, more like informative way. So you're going to make an argument, but let me show you what we're doing down here. They don't want you to think this has to be like a research paper or a persuasive paper. Instead, it's an analysis. So if I was doing something like fantasy theme, let's go with this. I think that we can start to look at some of these concepts here. So it's simply by using the symbolic convergence perspective, because that's the psychology, right? And specifically, I'm going to analyze it using fantasy theme. I will look at the dominant, I don't have to be redundant, themes that Donald Trump used in his Republican National Convention 2020 speech to sustain and build his community base. You could look at a speech today if you wanted to, but just telling us what even the particular themes are and how he started to like develop those you could do. To understand how the hashtag #MeToo created a movement of feminists to address and resist sexual assault, I will examine two fantasy themes, right? And so what two fantasy themes emerged throughout like the Me Too movement? Maybe we could look at that. This was one from a class, John. In looking at Jay-Z and Beyonce's collaboration on the Run, I will describe how they used fantasy to create an alternative theme to what love and romantic relationship can mean in society. So in turn, theirs, rather than symbolically converging this idea, how did the popularity in this new area form of interest in turn of like, now this is what a relationship could be, or this is what it can mean, or how did they start to communicate that fantasy to individuals by going against the grain? Using fantasy theme analysis, one can look at how the Proud Boys create a community of hate through rhetorical visions. So like, let me show you through two rhetorical visions that they do. Like maybe like I'm going to talk about master, like here's the vision with through the master analog here, and then here's another vision through their pragmatic analog, right? So you could just like break down those two. Again, I don't need you, obviously. And this is the other thing that I want you to be reminded. This is only like 3 to 5 pages. And like I said, the 5 is probably going to be more along the lines, but you are not required to address every last part of every last theory. I'm not looking for you to do that. I know that some of the analyses in the text or the sample student essays, they are like so long and descriptive and detailed. Absolutely. Those are like 9 to 10 page papers. I'm looking at you to give me like a snippet or a little bit of information, simply letting me know that you understand like, okay, well, this is an artifact. Here's what it's all about. If I'm looking at it in terms of A, B, or C, and then here's what we would look at in that theory. And then here's what that means for society. Again, the idea of going into depth, but I don't want you to feel like you have to address everything and go into full research mode and finding other, other information about like things like the impact, etc. Simply going along with what we know and what we are simply presented with and what like the evidence maybe talks about when you're looking at the rhetorical situation, right? Like if after this was presented, the increase in sales went up. If after this presented 20 more people, like 200 more people joined, Trump's team. If after he did this, a bunch of people went out and did blank. If after we, that's what we could look at as well. To keep in mind with that rhetorical situation that the importance and relevance is there. Whatever we really like, again, I just want to make sure that when you start to pick out specific things, don't feel like you need to address every last element. And when you read through the sample analyses, don't feel overwhelmed and don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing it right. Remember, Amanda wants me to do like this in a smaller version. And that's why by specifically illustrating things like, using fantasy themes, one can look at how the Proud Boys, right? So I know, create a community of hate through rhetorical vision. So like, what are 2 things that they use to produce hate through their master analogs? So it's like, I'll talk about who the Proud Boys are. and I'll talk about what they do. And then I'll go in and I'll talk about, for the next part, if I'm going to do the application of the theory, I'll talk about like the master analogs, right? And then what I'll do is I'll go into that conclusion, and that is suffice for me. However, here's the deal, and I really want to make sure that each of you are grabbing on this. Oh, let me do this last one. Using the Dodge Truck 2020 campaign, I don't know, I will look at how the themes of freedom and pride drive the fantasy of patriotism. So like, how do they continue to build in these two things? How does that gain community? How do people take it on? How do people go forward with that? Is that like a little bit more?
Just for clarification, so we're not applying the same artifact to all perspectives. We're choosing one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You are just going to choose one.
I thought we had
Absolutely.
to walk it through like each perspective. No? Okay.
No, I mean, that was when I was saying, like, if you wanted to do one artifact for all three papers,
Okay.
that would work. But otherwise, if you want it for this artifact, just one perspective is suffice.
Okay.
The thing is that you will more than likely only stick in because, and hold on one second, I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to share with you something new. I don't know how many of you have been working in your grid. And if you haven't, and I'm kind of thinking that this is maybe where some of us were maybe not making that connection. So let me go through something real quick. So for example, if you can all like look at your grid and start to fill those out, I think you will find that it will help you to understand the material that you already got. And that's why it's like, while your people were giving their presentation or as you go through it, try to fill out these grids. And I think the important thing, just as we went through this, right? Like, so for example, the symbolic convergence theory is this like larger idea that people communicate, and when their ideas and their symbols, right, those thoughts, come together to create a common worldview, that's when we get symbolic convergence. Symbols, right, communication, convergence coming together. When it makes sense, then we start to create that reality for us. And so for us, we want to see how do really what they were starting to look at was like group theory. And we still use symbolic convergence when you look at group theory. And you can look at this in like focus groups and so many different types of ways and marketing, advertising, etc. But in terms of like rhetoric, also we can look at it in terms of drama. And so if we were thinking about drama, often they want you to look at like the dramatistic parts of a situation. So the idea of like, how is this storytelling? And that's really what it is the drama. How do we tell these stories, or how do your shows tell these dramatic stories in order to create and come to create this whole new type of reality? So if we look at those things like Harry Potter, right? The author starts to create those amazing symbols and she starts to write a story. Those symbols come to life and they start to manifest within not only the characters that drives them forward, but also the audience that creates an investment in both. And so through that storytelling, people will start to come together and, you know, talk about these things. So if we wanted to do a fantasy theme analysis, we want to just then start to look at how does the rhetoric create this particular reality, right? How are these symbols trying to create this reality? Because everybody can have symbolic convergence. We get it. We're right there on the same like page. Sure, we're understanding, but how does that create a particular reality that takes people to a next step of community, that it keeps groups growing, that it keeps them building, right? And so we talk about that idea of those stages. The fantasy looks through that communication, the basic unit of communication. So it's going to be looking at specific like words or phrases, even if you wanted to think of a joke or an analogy or a metaphor, wordplay, pun. It can even be like a reference to somebody, like an imaginary person, if you will. And we can put on these themes or ideas. And that's why I was even saying creating a particular reality in communicating about AOC what are some of the ways that we then start to create a reality about who she is or an individual in society? I don't know. So when this basic unit is shared with others, it creates our base of social reality. That's what it starts to come up to. And so same idea in symbolic convergence, they're looking at it in terms of like, oh, groups, organizations, businesses, like healthcare, et cetera. We'll look at it in terms of popular culture and take that idea of a fantasy theme. So where does this fantasy theme really start to make sense? And that's what I look at over here. So there are some steps to understanding our fantasy theme. The first thing we have to understand, right, is that there are particular parts of the drama. So that's what we want to look at first. And that's like your rhetorical situation, right? The characters, there's the plot line. So those are the main parts of the narratives. What are like important parts of your plot line? Those in this case, what's like driving things forward. So that may even be like a particular theme, if you will. The scene is where the event takes place, either in the fake, aka in the mediated world, like in the popular culture, or in fact in real life here. So like, where do communities come together and converge, i.e. like Comic-Con and things like that, right? Where do they come together? Conventions, meetups. So when you put all those things together, when the drama all comes together, all of a sudden now that's the rhetorical vision. So it's like somebody has created this vision for you using like characters, a plot line, whatever. So there's your TV show, here's the rhetorical like vision. The important thing though is that there is going to be a narrative, like what's the theme there? So that's what we need to look at here. When the above concepts come together, we get this rhetorical vision. So that's the putting together of things. And in turn, that vision creates a shared community, this collective. So how does it create a shared community? How does it start to do so? So the first thing, you're going to just describe the situation. What is it? What is this artifact? Then you say, okay, when all that comes together, here is a rhetorical vision. Do I actually have a rhetorical vision though? Really making sure of that. So how does the rhetorical vision come together? Well, y'all, through master analogs. Many visions, there can be many types of visions, but analogs and these master analogs are ones that are going to tell us about these core values, core orientations that are common. And so it's going to speak to the characters, and it's also going to speak to us as viewers. So we have to believe in the reality of the show first, but then also how is that going to potentially how can that even move us? So let's start thinking about the three different types of analogs. So again, a vision, inside of that vision, what are there? Analogs, right? So there's the first one is the righteous, did it say in here? Oh, that's so funny. Righteous, so like the correct way of doing things. There's wrong, right, wrong, good, bad, God, ideas, and so you can go back and look at some of those other criteria as well. The social focuses on trust, camaraderie, friendship, etc. But these are those themes again that are coming out. And then there's pragmatic themes, like the concept of getting the job done or working hard or no. Good times. So how will it come about? So you can identify those, in fact, analogs. This would be where you are starting to work on your description, as well as if you were looking at it in those three parts, right? You can pick out these particular elements. And then in any group, once they've adhered to and bought into the vision, and these analogs are continuing, and these ideas are continuing to work themselves through the community, through the group. They're reproducing, they're restructuring. So how is it continuing to take on its process? That's where you look at the fantasy life cycle, right? And so your groups talk to you about this cycle and how they stay and they maintain. If I was somebody and I was looking at a, even to write a paper, it is more than fine to concentrate and make your organization about the fantasy cycle, even if you wanted to do so. If that's what you wanted to talk about, I mean, obviously you'll have to bring in some of these other elements. But if you wanted to talk about the consciousness creating and raising and sustaining and decline and the end, you are more than welcome to talk about maybe a campaign or maybe a piece of popular culture that has clearly gone through this. And you can simply give me a representation of maybe a movement that has gone through this fantasy life cycle within popular culture. And you can identify the different elements or potentially the particular communication patterns that in fact maybe disrupted that or pushed it differently. So these elements that we're looking at here, these concepts that are necessary, those are going to be the things that you bring about in that I'm like description analysis. No, in your oh gosh, Amanda, what's my word? What's my word? What's my word? What's my name? What's my I'm singing from Descendants. See, I'm watching Dylan's watching The Descendants. She loves Uma. It's a great question for your popular culture ones. Sorry, so for your interpretation, let's talk about that. Talk about these necessary. So these would be for the interpretation stage. So remember, rhetorical situation for your description, interpretation are these different parts that you can break down. You don't have to break them all down. And then what is that going to reveal to us? So remember, why would this be valuable to somebody studying popular culture? These are my ideas. I don't know if these will help you in any way, shape, or form to start to come to understand why we look at it. But what does it reveal about people? And then what I would consider as well. So even here it says, so looking at the different types of rhetorical visions created in an artifact, and what about those visions keep people going in the fantasy? So in our case, continue to be popular and the ability to have a presence in our society. Popular culture is filled with so many fantasy themes. So this idea of like, how does a little message come to make a whole movement? How does one little idea come to make that? So what's behind that message? The drama or the parts that turns into a rhetorical vision that is accepted by many people. That is what helps that message continue on. Those visions, like I said, are typically seen in master analogs. These analogs are motivating categories that draw in different types of individuals. So both the characters and those living out the fantasy. I encourage to ask questions about little things. How did these shows keep audience going? Like, how do they create communities and collectives that go for long periods of time? Even if it's like the original genre or themes, there's a lot of different themes that we can like look at per se, in terms of like, oh, romantic relationships or friendship or, you know, good and bad overcoming evil, etc. But we can also think about types of genres, right? So even if it's, let's say, a comedy, or somebody is an individual who exists in comedy, how does that person reinvent themselves into other genres in order for the audience to stay on and keep going with them? Does that make sense? What kind of dialogue has to be expressed or talked about? Does this approach use any kind of like examination of ideologies? As we would look at it, you can use this type of analysis to identify hidden agendas or some kind of like motivations if you wanted to. I gave the example of like, and so it says, or other motives of alleged adherence of the vision. Often if you wanted to tell us what the hidden agenda was, or if you are having a difficult time identifying these agendas or what is really being said or what the theme is, often if people act against the fantasy, it will indicate to you what was right or wrong about that, if that makes sense. You can always like look at something in that case. So over here, what I in fact did, and just in case you want to look at this one more time, let me see, fantasy theme. So even if you were thinking about, you know, fantasy theme, and this may be something helpful for you, you want to make sure that if you're doing a fantasy theme, that your artifact has like 3 things in common. One is their shared group consensus. Like, are you be able to prove that there's a rhetorical community and audience who is like bought into this? Is there a group consciousness? So like a simple Google search to find out like how many fans there are, or how many different communities, or how many different like groups of people are part of it or buying into it, that would be something easy to do. Is there a rhetorical vision reality, like link? Are people buying into where like this fantasy is like spilling over into life? And then finally, like, is there artistry? So the artistry idea, like in terms of like, is this, so they talk about it in terms of like television and your text. In terms like, is it well written? Is it a well-written show? Is it like have a high level of like writing where it follows those specific standards and types, etc. So that's just one thing. Is there like rhetorical skill in the communication? And then you want to like maybe see like this idea of artistry again. Remember, how does it compete with other different types of works? And does the theme work inside the larger vision? So for example, does an episode that focuses on Black Lives Matter work inside a TV show like The League? If the show or so if there's a larger vision in this show, if we know that, and like your text I think talks about, like for example, like we know that The League, and if you don't know The League, it's shown on FX, it's about fantasy football. These people are like incredibly crude. They play into all like your misogynistic claims that you want to, like it plays into every last stereotype. They love to bust each other's, lack of the letter term, it's what they do. They like bust each other's, starts with buh, ends with an alls, and that's what their like thing is. To bring in any type of politics or to bring in a Black Lives Matter episode would very much disrupt that type of larger vision. So even in turn, like, does this particular like theme, was it a one-off, or is it something that is a part of, or did the one-off make a whole new like movement and now we're like super into it because you addressed it? Who knows? But the bottom line for me, I just don't worry about like all these things. Long story longer, is there anything in popular culture that you've been super obsessed with, where you like, oh my gosh, it is Twilight? Last time I remember that I was like well, I mean, I've been excited about a lot of things, but like, oh my gosh, Twilight, oh my gosh. And then like every last second of the day, it's like, I got to get back to the book. I have to keep reading. I have to keep going. And I don't know if you've ever been obsessed with something like this, or you don't want to turn off the TV because you want to watch the next episode, right? I'm going to say this would be a good thing for you to talk about with fantasy, because there's something that drew you in. And I like you to ask yourself, what were the themes that I was so intrigued by? What were they saying? Or what was it about that drew me in? Because in that way, you know, you can start to see, okay, what is this maybe a bigger part of? So have I been obsessed with it? Have other been too? What was the common theme of why people have been obsessed with this? What brings it out? And so when we start to look at those themes, you can potentially start to match those up with like the language, because it may not be obvious. It's not like we're coming out saying like, oh my gosh, this show is about, you know, patriotism. No, but it's going to be within there. And maybe you didn't even know that that's what drove you. Or maybe it was like dissent of something specific that drove you, you know? So like considering all of that, you know, think about a show, a song, a movie, a franchise, a movement, a product. Any of these things can be examined. And just think about like, what was the theme that either reinforced the theme, or perchance, you know, the ideology, or in fact worked against it to create this kind of movement. Does that make sense to you? A little bit more? Yeah, so considering the parts of the drama, you know, then you start to look at like what vision is used and go forward from there. I don't know if this makes any more sense or if it's getting a little bit more complicated. I think it's just that I'm not quite sure where y'all in specific are at. Oh, Euphoria, great. Who was saying that? Remy. Yes, Remy, what are you thinking about?
What do you mean?
Oh, I in my head, I read that. I was like, Eureka! Like, oh yeah, she found something.
Oh
And
yeah,
then,
no, I just you said like things that you've been obsessed with that like came out like recently.
do you feel like your generation has a lot of following around Euphoria?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Do you think that like people are like, oh my gosh, Euphoria is coming back? Oh, you know, like what is that like theme that's kind of like driving people's interest and that's keeping that part going? I don't necessarily know if there's like a huge community per se, but if you wanted to even talk about like, you know, how it's resonating with your age group and individuals are converging on this shared reality, or has Euphoria presented so many shared realities that psychiatrists are converging on the themes? I don't know if there's anything there. Now, I have not watched more Euphoria than like the first couple episodes because it was I know it's too hard for me. So much of my soul. I try to just watch positive, you know, other things right now. But what I don't know how it has created maybe something. And even like, is there a mental health issue? Is there awareness of something else that has spurred out of this? Is there a
I think it's
collective
like awareness of like teen drug use, because I feel like it's one of the few shows that talks about teen drug use without like glorifying it. Like Skins and like those shows kind of glorify it, whereas Euphoria shows like a more honest representation of it.
Uh-huh. And is that honest representation in, and I don't want to say like tween drama, but like between those age groups, like is like what kinds of themes maybe in new teen representation, like that like honest depictions and blah blah are driving more teens to watch these real shows. That could be something even to look at there. The other thing about the, I don't know, even like the glamoring of it, and then the non, has it started any types of dialogues of like, don't do drugs between your generation?
I feel like just in quarantine, I haven't necessarily been able to like talk to a lot of people about it, just because like I started watching it during quarantine.
Yeah.
But it definitely made me not want to do drugs. So just speaking personally.
Yay, so that's done a good job. All right, so that's good. I would even look at like the message boards or discussion boards for the show, like kind of look at some analyses of the show and see what individuals are drawn to and what they're interested in. See if any types of movements even came out of it. And if it didn't, you know, if maybe a movement came out of it, but it didn't last very long, why did it not? And you could even like talk about that, you know, you could go through the cycle and be like, this is how it started, and then this one, but this is where it started to like die off. So you could always talk about something like that as well, in terms of like fanfare, in terms of like social media, that it started and then it went away. Again, like with the, you know, fantasticness of like a pop star or some kind of, trying to even think. I know, I'm even trying to think of like, I'm like one of those nerds who plays into this like community thing, by the way. I mean, I'm the person who like buys the tickets to go to symposiums with my favorite TV show. So I mean, you can definitely look at that. I was thinking about fantasy theme today. Anybody in here watch Parks and Rec? Okay. So yes, I agree with Mason. If I could only here. I'll show you this one. It's like what I just wish that we could have had. Where's my, can you see, where's my camera? I can't see my camera. I'm like, what, can that just happen? Can that just happen this year? I wish so. Anywho, I love Leslie Knope. I think she's, you know, I also have this one in my office. I don't know if you, again, why can't I see myself? I don't know. Hold on a second. I'll show you. It says, I don't know if you can see it. It says, be the Leslie Knope of what you want to do. I love Mason and Leslie Knope. Anyway, big fan of Parks and Rec. And that being said, there's a very fun saying from Parks and Rec that gained popularity and moved outside of the space and into the mainstream. Anybody know which one it is?
Is it treat yourself?
That's right, it is, Mason. So how does treat yourself, right? How did it become an entire new thing? So Treat Yourself 2011 was something brought up by Tom and Donna, two characters on Parks and Rec. And since Treat Yourself, I mean, that one has certainly connected people. We know what the saying is, but also how has that catchphrase spurred into popular culture to create an entire new group of people in terms of how does treat yourself work in terms of commodification? So I was at the Parks and Rec 10, again, nerd alert. I was at the Parks and Rec 10-year reunion last year at the Kodak Theater, and Donna, Retta, she came out to talk about treat yourself because, and you can always like Google something, but it was this idea of something that was like owned there, but now like how it has become commodified and everybody uses it. And then when they see them, they're like, treat yourself. How did it start to now like lose a little bit of it? It's a very funny idea. But you can even talk about how something as simple as that catchphrase, like, you know, was created, then it's how sustained, how it's like worked to bring in other generation, how they brought it back into the storyline to remind you. I don't know, just those are like different things that you could always even, you know, kind of take a shot at. Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
I'm having a hard time just thinking about, I mean, the prompt is so broad. I'm just frantically writing notes, but I'm having a hard time, and I guess it really depends on what artifact I choose. But if I happen to go with the, what is it called? The cycle, the stages of fantasy life cycle. Just because there's so, okay. One random idea that I was thinking about was just the rise and fall of the video game Slenderman, because it was just a big moment that I remember being, I don't know, this was just one of the many ideas that was like, this is really popular for a while. But I'm having a hard time thinking about what that game's like, for example, Rise and Fall, what it has to say about society as a whole. Is that like something we have to address, or I don't know, and I haven't even picked anything yet, but yeah, that's
sure. And you could do it as society as a whole, but in terms, it's like, what about the rhetoric? That's what I would do. So if you want to say it like as society as a whole, great, but like, what does it say about the culture?
Oh, okay. So it doesn't
demographic video.
It doesn't have to be what does this say about human nature.
No.
It's okay. That helps me.
Seriously, just look at it like, what did it talk about with this community?
Okay,
what
so
did
just
it talk
keep it
about the
within.
collective?
Okay.
How did that work with them? So that if we were in the future going to look at gamers, and let's say I'm a gaming developer and I wanted to know how to get these kids hooked, community, and continue on their own, here's what you can look at, and here's what didn't work, and this is where it went, right? And like when you see the demise, that would be a fun thing to look at, like what started to change in the language. Was it maybe what started to change in maybe even the setting? Was it the age group and that the technology didn't develop with it? Like, I don't know. You could look at something like those elements, but Um, yeah. So if you want, I think that is a great thing to do, in all honesty, because you can also look at like what it is. So like setting it up, talk about like when it was created, how it was going on, etc. You can talk about the particular characters of the game if you want to, in setting that up, and what the purpose, aka your plot line, is. But how does so what are the like themes of the game?
Honestly, I haven't even really played it. I just remember watching, I don't know if I was watching like other people play it on YouTube at the time. And basically the premise is there's somebody alone in the woods, and you know that Slenderman is like somewhere out there in the fog. He's watching you, and eventually you will like turn around and he jump scares you. So I was like, what does this have to say about human nature that we keep doing that? This game was so popular.
I totally, okay, now I know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I thought we were like seriously talking about like, it wasn't necessarily a video game per se. It was this concept and movement, right? Is that crazy?
I honestly, I don't even know. I just
wonder how it
remember it was a video game, and then I know there was a movie.
I
Yeah.
feel like one thing you can
Here we go.
um
I wonder if when kids started to commit suicide, yeah, also the fantasy, right? Like that ethical responsibility of fantasy that we can talk about. Because when you're talking about these master analogs, right, from these sanctioning agents or from these characters, who has the responsibility to like, you know, push that idea forward? So how did this individual get people to in fact like take their life? Because that was it, right?
Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a cult. A great thing to do is a cult, but this in turn, like, yeah, it originated in popular culture, right? And so like who it had, that's a really, I think that's a real fun one. And because again, Catherine, you could look at this for 15,000 pages. And that's why I'm saying, like, if you just want to narrow it down and give us a little synthesis with like the cycle of it, and then point out the little elements of like an analog that came with maybe within that cycle, or potentially like, you know, this is where the fantasy started to fan out. Here was the language that did it. I'm cool with however you wanted to like really organize that too. Because that's the other thing that you really have to remember. And I don't know if you remember reading from like the first chapter of Sell Now, and I'll just reinforce this. Popular culture exists within all these other spaces, right? You can do popular culture and politics, popular culture and law, popular culture and business, popular culture and blah, 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 blah. So there isn't necessarily a perfect standard every time for writing an analysis. We know that we want to describe, we want to interpret, and then what's the impact? But really how we strategize and go about that, there's not like a, you know, here's the thing. Unless we're writing that 20-page research paper, there's not like a huge particular standard. So however you want to pick out the ideas to talk about is good by me. But I really like that one. I never even thought of that. So fun. I may use that in the future. Whenever they offer pop culture again. So sad. I'm so glad you all got on it though. You know, it's only every couple semesters thing. Do you need any other thoughts, questions about that one? Oh yeah, go ahead, Mason.
Well, not about specifically that one, but well, I was just gonna ask, for something that's like based off like a real thing, like I was considering the Facebook social network, and so it's like a fantasy like world that they created, but it's based on like real, like reality, you know?
You'd like the movie The Social Network?
Yeah.
The old one.
Yeah.
What, okay, so inside you want to talk about how they pushed forward the idea of, like, for example, if you're looking at the movie, what are you wanting to start looking at? Like the themes within there that created a momentum for people to get on board with it?
Oh yeah, well, definitely the Facebook aspect because it's like sustained throughout the years. But I was thinking more like the fantasy, like on top of reality. like because like some fantasy like fictions we see are just like completely like fantasy, but it's like these are fictionalized on like real people, so it's like it's maybe some kind of comparative of like this fantasy on top of these real people like Mark Zuckerberg and like all the people involved in the movie.
Right. Because what would we want to know about that particular like group? Does that make sense? Like what by us looking at this as a fantasy would it tell us about
Yeah, I might deviate from this. Yeah, because I think we can like group like the Facebook community, which is like a very wide community now, but it might be a little bit too much from the actual movie.
Right. And if the movie then promoted this idea that Facebook is like the connection and we need to buy into it because it's like, you know, free enterprise and things like that, and like this idea that like any kid could accomplish anything. I'm not, you know, whatever that is. And then after, if we saw that movie and we saw a bunch of individuals like starting to like join Facebook and be a part of it because of that dialogue within the movie that drove forward, like that this is important, that it's an important part, that may be a way to look at it. In my head, it may be even more effective to look at the social dilemma as a piece and how the social dilemma has created and used language and created a fantasy about reality that in turn has now created a movement of individuals who are saying, no more. And who knows even who's like come out of that, if there's been like, you know, if there's a group of like the anti-Facebookers or something, like, I don't know if something has like continued to spur them and maybe this this particular thing pushed that forward even more. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, I'll explore it a little bit more definitely. And like maybe some other topics too.
Yeah, absolutely. Aimed at to sacrifice. Okay, wait. Some of the girls aim to sacrifice one of their fames in the name of Slenderman. Interesting, Laura. Fascinated by the Slenderman shenanigan, I tell you. In terms of visual pleasure analysis, let's talk about that one real quick. Visual pleasure analysis is really one of the easier ones to do because the interpretation is like the three parts. So let me actually share, let me see if I shared this with y'all. And we came back in here real quick and oh my gosh, I realized that it's very late. Okay. So if we're talking about the visual perspective, and even if you were looking at like, you know, something like this, the visual perspective in general, there's a lot of different things to look at with visually, right? Because we can look at it from art, we can look at it from cinema, we can look at it from narrative. They talk about like all the psychology behind how we view things so that we know when we are looking at advertisements, etc., we can be like, oh, that's like, you know, Gestalt, that's like, oh, shapes, that's, you know, you can look at the different ways that people frame things, how they place people in the images. But visual pleasure theory is the one that individuals will use and they will push forward in using a theoretical approach to look at things that are maybe visually appealing in popular culture. Oftentimes connected with another perspective. Like I said, feminist perspective is predominantly it, but do not worry. The only thing I am very sorry that I did not do is have you read Laura Mulvey's article during this time, and especially during advertising. She is like the founding individual in terms of this like a visual pleasure theory. And when it comes to the cinema, she's the one who came up with the concept of like the male gaze and how we start to look at that. So really a lot of what visual pleasure looks at, it very much combines itself because it deals with that male gaze. It exists within the realm of feminism and feminist theory quite easily. So here, what I simply want you to know about, there's concepts necessary to analyzing. Remember, this started in the psychoanalytic realm. So if we think about Freud and we think about all the individuals who talked about like really back in like psychoanalysis, that's where this came from, with these concepts of, you know, the scopophilia, the narcissism, and what was the other one? Oh no, actually just those two. The thing they want you to know and to remind us, and you can always point this out in your paper if you wanted to, even when describing like this is where like it came from or whatever, this is why we would look at it, is because individuals are oftentimes unconscious in these two particular things, like the pleasure found in looking. These aren't conscious things that we're like, oh my gosh, I'm always looking for somebody to look at. It just happens. And especially when it's within popular culture, we see it, we are given pleasure, and we're not oftentimes aware of why we're maybe even buying something, but it's like, ooh, I just like looking at it. It's pretty, it's nice to look at, right? And the same thing with this narcissism, this idea that we see ourselves, or hopefully like after looking, we experience that mirror stage. And of course, they talk about mirror stages in terms of like sexuality. We can look at mirror stages in other elements as well. But what we are drawn into popular culture, like to identify with other characters, persons, models, or examples, and they're sort of looking at beauty, that, etc. Or in fact, things that are going to look like us and give us these ideas that we can accomplish as well. But again, they're unconscious and they're typically taken for granted. And so for visual pleasure theory, there's three different things that you can look at and that come out of those two psycho analyses. And so what you would examine in any artifact is you would start to pick out the different elements of like looking. So how does fetishism, voyeurism, and narcissism present within this artifact? And you would talk about little things like, you know, how, like, what are the images? Does it have the color? Does it have like, I don't know, is it putting somebody's body ahead? Is it simply showing a particular part of their body or an object, right? So we'll start to look at that. So you can fetishism, which we know, like just being worshipped for what it, you know, it is. It's an object that is being given like magical powers, that all of a sudden, if I have this, I'm going to be great at it. If I can, or it's going to make me become something amazing. The object itself or parts of a person's body that are being looked at are the things to be, if you will, fetishized. We give power to these products, to these parts, to a thigh gap. Why? You know, it is this way that we start to rhetorically create its importance. And so then we have also the voyeurism, that we are encouraged to watch other people. Does it have this element of being watched? Now, sure, sexual things, but we can also think of like scandalous or salacious acts, that it draws you in a little bit more. But again, this idea that things you would not necessarily see in the public eye, but we would use it in the private spectrum. And then finally, the idea of narcissism. And this comes from that mirrored image. And remember, if we want to talk about narcissism and voyeurism and fetishism, and you can talk about this all, especially like, you know, within social media as well, is always a good one. But remember the mirror idea from psychoanalysis, the idea that the viewer is drawn to be likely, the viewer is drawn to be like the representation. There we go. The viewer is able to recognize their own likenesses in the image or imagine that they can mirror them. I guess I did not finish that idea. So the three elements there are really what you would look at in that part of your interpretation. Why do we use this approach? To see if there's something beyond the surface meaning. And that's exactly what Selnau says. She says, if you ever look at an advertisement, or you're looking at an image, or you're looking at something, and you're like, this is saying more than, hey, buy this cup of coffee. What's it trying to say? That's where you could do a visual analysis. And this one is super easy and simple in this turn if you want to simply describe how it is doing it. The pickle about the interpretation, of course, but
why would we use it? I always like to say, like, we would use it to see how visual images are used to sell products or sell an ideology. That's how we would do it. And then we would in turn use it to do the exact same thing. We can examine and we can critique, but also if we wanted to create a product, if we wanted to create an ideal to sell, or if we were working, you know, for a company and we had to push forward an ideal visually, how could we do so? The same would happen, you know, up here in the fantasy theory. That same idea, like how could we in fact start to incorporate fantasy theory into our rhetoric if we are running a campaign, or if we're a part of a social media group, or if we're doing something, how can we push that forward to get people on board? So in terms of this theory, it does ask us to examine what else may be said. So when it comes time to the interpretation, it's asking you like what ideologies. Again, we know that the particular ideologies exist within our society, that there are standards of living. And you can, of course, let us know like how these are represented. You can also like, what about those ideologies? Let us know like how we should behave or act. What does it tell us about our behavior? You know, if we do A, we will get B. What is that B? And that may be what you would like to point out for your entire type of paper. So if I was looking at, just again, those samples, this one can be, rather than making it, again, heavy in feminist theory or something else, I said, by looking at the three constructs of visual pleasure theory, fetishism, narcissism, and voyeurism, one can understand how the blank advertisement, just pick one, impacts the ideology of blank. So like, is there an ideology already set up? Is there an ideology that if I work hard, I can succeed? That if, you know, the ideology of thin is better, the ideology is beauty is what success is, the ideology that immigrants are, I don't know, like, so you can even go into it in the political, right? How do we start to look? Now, again, typically it's going to be about gender, sexuality, gender and sexuality. Those are the ways that we can, gender, sex, sexuality. You can always look at that. Using a visual perspective, I will look at how the music video, advertisement, social media product effectively uses blank to draw in viewers, right? That's all you have to do. It's like, this was successful, here it was, and it probably is because people were dying to look at it. They were engaged in it. It was selling sex, like we know, blah, 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 right? And you can talk about something in that way. When it gets to the implications, what could this potentially have? And you could go ahead and lay that out, again, based upon what we know already. When we've seen this happen in society, this potentially goes on. We've seen that this happens before and this goes on. It does not have to be terribly long. You can use research from other places. You can, if it's common sense, you can reiterate that. Feel free to go forward. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, in terms of like body image, those are always good ones. There's something, and you know, I was trying to write it earlier, and I was writing one about, like, for example, like the movie Magic Mike. You all remember that one? Kind of. How it flips the male gaze, and they create a, you know, so like, how did Magic Mike use fetishism, voyeurism, and narcissism to create, you know, to shift the male gaze? Who knows? In media. Is there a music video that does this, or are there music videos that perpetuate the male gaze, that reinforce it? If you have to look at like oh God, who is it? Who did one? There's a couple. I mean, there's a lot of music videos out there that you can see that have a lot of voyeuristic qualities. I know I keep wanting to show you this one, but it's also 5:20, so I don't want to. Do you want to ask like some questions? Do you have any outstanding ideas? I can, of course, keep going, but I also don't know if I'm confusing you or not answering anything, or if this is helping.
Do you want us then to cite outside resources in this article? Like, should we look for outside resources?
You can, especially when it comes time to like reflecting the rhetorical situation, right? So, or like whatever parts you can, or like the actors or the whatever, you can always look at some outside places to find out like what was the reasoning behind doing it, like what was the purpose and things like that. If you need to look at particular, because also in your first, like when you're setting up your analysis, it's important to tell like why this is something that's relevant to look at in society. So you're going, if you read through any of these sample essays, just even in those first like parts, you'll start to see how it goes, but something whereby you can let us know like that it has popularity, that it has traction, that it's something within popular culture that is like marked as an artifact that will go forward. So it's important to talk about that. And then the only other thing is like, you just need to justify like why you would use that type of analysis. And so if you wanted to do that, you could always like cite the cite CELNO, you could cite the original theorist as to what they're looking at. If you want to read up on, again, the popularity of something, or if you're talking about like groups and communities, going to their fan pages and taking out a quote that went, you could cite something like that. Does that make sense? But because you're not trying to prove per se anything, it's not necessarily persuasive. It's like, I don't need you to go out and find like arguments that are going to be like, and that's why it's true. You know what I mean? It's simply like describing it and explaining it. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Anybody else with some of these questions, thoughts? And again, I do know that this, like Catherine was saying, there's just, it's a broad prompt because of the fact that it encompasses all three perspectives. And so, for your media logic perspective, obviously, there's not like a theory, obviously, that goes along with that one. So what I want to encourage each of you is that the tenets or the components of anything that falls under like these media-centered perspectives. If you wanted to talk about, social learning theory and visual pleasure, you could potentially combine something like that. Like we, copy other individuals, and when we watch, I mean, I don't know if you wanted to do something like that. If you wanted to talk about, you can also talk about, if you wanted, without having to ground it in a theory, you could ground it in the perspective of the one that I was talking about before. If you wanted to ground it in like social learning theory, or you want to do like a parasocial relationship theory, you could do something like that, about talking about even with fantasy as to how we buy into like that person or that individual, and like kind of wanting to be in that way. You could do something like that if you wanted. But in terms of actual like analysis, if you will, it's often not necessarily done through, a specific realm. We're just looking at it through the perspectives. And so if you wanted to look, you can combine them with other rhetorical perspectives, of course. But you could also simply look at it from a media-centered perspective to see how, I mean, I'm trying to think of even, has anybody thought of a couple or anything? Was anybody going to use media-centered perspective? Because I can certainly go on, but.
I was thinking of using it, but I wasn't sure of the ideas I was thinking were, I don't know, correct.
I think that it depends on where you want it, because anything with Survivor would be good, because the formula works. It's really what it has to be. Like Survivor has not changed things too much. The formula works. So that could be something you could even like look at in terms of Survivor and in terms of like media. And I would say that would be media like logic, if you will, too. What was I watching the other day that I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect with like media logic? When we watch a show and like, even if you like watch a show and you realize, well, never mind, I'm not even gonna go into it because I don't want to get like another 20 minutes in too deep. If you wanted, however, Valentina, to talk a little bit more about your particular way that you wanted to go, and if you wanted to look at something, let me know. I'm more than happy to take a, to take a gander at it and see what you want to do or go with. Trying to think of anything else. Okay, I think I'm good, but I want to make sure that you all are. And again, Valentina, if you come up with like, okay, Amanda, I want to do Survivor and I want to do it from a media perspective, and I think I want to simply look at A and B. Great. Let's see how we can do that for you. If you want to talk about like popularity of the seasons, if you want to talk about how it has sustained over time due to its formula. If you want to talk about how technology has, or how technology has impacted how Survivor viewership continues to get built. So like, even if you were talking about fantasy theme, this would be one of those ways. If we're talking about like the steps or the processes, and you could bring in like, oh, well, they used, like you could talk about a part of like media logic that they used in terms of the technological shift and how that continued to build the, in the cycle of things. So you could go in and talk about how that technology did it. Also in Survivor, trying to think about the mediums. It really doesn't make a huge difference. I don't know if the mediums make any difference, but let me know if you want to start thinking, and I can totally like just brainstorm and outline with you. And that goes for all of y'all. Okay, so listen, when you start to write this, don't spend hours like spinning and thinking. Try to make this as simple as you can on yourself. And if you want to talk through anything personally, let me know. I am going out of town tomorrow morning, and I will be gone through Sunday, but I'm not going out of town anywhere special. I'm going to my college roommate's house in the Palm Springs. So we are going to go and hang out together and just relax and do a bunch of nothing for the weekend. So I want to you to know that if I needed to sneak away, I absolutely can. But if you have some ideas that you wanted to get to working on, I'm really happy to like work on them either with you like now, or at least even early tomorrow morning or something like that we can do. And you can always send me something via email as well. Would you like a copy of this grid? Okay, I'm going to send you a copy of my grid, and I'll send you a copy of some of those like research questions as well. But I think the best thing for you to do is even just take a step back. One, either first look for the artifact, or two, just start asking questions about the things around you, why and how. And then you can simply make those into like potentially a statement. Or you can start to look at like, I love the media center theory, and I think that the best part is like, oh my gosh, I don't know, let's talk about cultivation theory. It's like the only thing I want to do. So like, great, let's work that out and let's find a way for it to work and match. Then let's find an artifact that works with that, and then go for it. And then just pick a specific part. Yeah? No, maybe so? Okay, we're nodding our heads. I'm going to assume that you're feeling okay about it. This is my fingers crossed. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? I'm worried about you. Are you feeling okay? Do I need to write everybody? Should I send them an extension? I don't know what to do. I think it's because nobody's saying anything. And it's not, I mean, I've gotten like 2 emails from people who needed extensions, and that's, I don't know if that's because they're overwhelmed and confused, or if it's just like, okay, we have other things going on. But alas, I think that my concern is, and you should be able to, we can read and just kind of go for it, but also, does it make sense? Are people clear? Do you know to choose an artifact? Does this give you some ideas to like describe it? Here's the tenets that you just need to point out. You don't need to point out all of them, and then your own little interpretation, and then move forward. Use some of those. Yeah, Mason.
Do you think that the topic of Saturday Night Live and like I don't know, I think that there's a lot of like different topics you can explore with Saturday Night Live. Maybe one being like the sustainability like throughout like their time, because it kind of like they've had like a formula of like certain skits and then update in the middle, and that, and maybe can I explore something around that?
Yeah, absolutely, you could. And I mean, Saturday Night Live is so great in so many ways, right? That Saturday Night Live will start like I mean, there's like characters that have gone on and people have bought into. And then you can totally talk about it in terms of, yeah, media logic if you wanted to, or any of those media theories as well. I think it's a great thing to look at also in terms of like a specific, really like during political times. It's really fascinating to see how they will potentially pick up on something and how that will parlay into the reality of it all. But yeah, I think that would be a really fun idea. The formula works, the strategies work. Yeah, I think that's a good one.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, sure. And I think that also it's a good one that it sustained itself so along like parody and humor, right? Like those, that parody, like that bringing about, like the people use Saturday Night Live in times of sadness, that it has been a staple of society. And it tells a lot about our society that we turn to comedy when we are sad, that Saturday like unites people in like something to talk about and something to giggle about over the weekend, you know. So it really has had that life and breath, and it does say something about our society when we use it, when we're more interested in it. It talks a lot about us as to how we view politics and how people, you know, love Saturday Night Live during a political season. What does it say about, yeah, again, like emotions? I think it's a good one. I think it says something. That's for darn sure. And if you even wanted to like read, you know, up about some of the ways that Saturday Night Live has sustained itself, see if you can pull out some themes there and then just plop it into your paper. Yeah. All right, team. Dylan Rose has now really benefited from our extension because I gave her the iPad. So playing a game. Getting micro-aggressed for some purchases. All right, y'all, I'm gonna let it go. Here we go. You all have a
Do you
great.
think I could?
Yeah, honey.
Sorry. Do you think I could stay a little bit to discuss my topic right now?
I just also had a quick question too.
Thank you.
You're welcome, man. Thank you so much. You have a good one, hon. Okay, yeah. And you can, of course, both ask if you wanted to. So, Laura, how you doing? What was your
I'm good. I think most of this is just coming from me being just generally very overwhelmed at the moment. But I just want a little bit of clarification in regards to I was thinking of doing social convergence theory just because like I feel like that's the one I have like the most understanding with, and just like I feel like I get pretty well, and I actually really just enjoyed going over it and such. And I read through it and whatnot, and I sort of had an idea about in terms of like how like right now there's like a lot of rise of like okay fandom collectives whatnot, and like in regards to like music artists, just like how they kind of create like whether it be like not really a song but like something that they maybe like popularize or something, like in terms of like the collective kind of gathers around a certain catchphrase, because like it came to my mind when you were mentioning the Parks and Rec thing, and sort of like I guess one of the things that came into my mind was like I know you'd not I like hairstyles and whatnot, so one of the things like this very popular I guess I would say catchphrase would be like this like it's like treat with kindness, and that is a catchphrase that has been sort of the collective in terms of like being able to sustain it and like what that kind of shows about it, and it's been commodified into like it started out as like a pin, and then now it's like his merch, and like everybody clung onto it and people are making stuff out of it, and that sort of like has started, you know, like fan movements towards donating things or social movements and whatnot. I just feel like there's something there, but I can't pinpoint it.
You just told us. You just did it. So you're going to talk about Harry Styles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, give us him, and you can talk even about like how it emerged, right? Like, so just like you can criteria. You can talk about how the kindness emerged, and then what you'll do is you'll then go in. So how was it used? Talk about how it was used for him. Like what was the context of it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll go in and you can build off those particular so how Harry put them together created a vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by him being there, by him putting it into the setting, by him doing blank, by like whatever context he was putting it in, he created this vision. And then the vision was put out to the masses. But how was that vision put out to the masses? Probably through some kind of like communication. And those communication.
Yeah, because it sort of has been adopted as this sort of like it started out as like something people saw, then they started making merch about it, then it became merch, and then it became like a way to like when it was announcing the second album, like that was a little tag at the bottom of like poster art, and it became a song. Like I just feel like it's progressed into a way of like this has been something that sort of bonded a community, and like maybe even like a social kind of analog going in there, or even righteous in terms of like doing what's good, being kind.
I would almost say like, yeah, how in different spaces, even like, and you could talk about that, like Harry Styles' use of kindness, or like how be kind, how his message of be kind has like, you know, created a movement of like kindness, I guess, like this idea to go out and do. I don't know where my train of thought went off on that. Well, so that was what I was saying. You could even talk about like social, pragmatic, righteous, and you could talk about like the 3 different ways that he utilizes this concept. And then how, like, so when he used it as the righteous, blah, 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 here's how his fans took up and they went. When he used it as the social, this is what he said. This is how he, like, I guess, framed it, whatever. These were the different ways that the Be Kind was framed. And in turn, then this is how the fans went or did it. So you could do it like that if you wanted, by talking about the 3 different analogs. You could also simply talk about the cycles if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Has progressed. So if you wanted to make that per se your interpretation, you could talk about within that first cycle per se. This is just my own idea. In that first cycle per se, you could talk about like, okay, this is the this was the first part of it. This is how it was done. This is how it was perpetuated. This is what happened. In the second one, this is how it done, blah, 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 blah. This is how they fanned out, and this is what happened. Then they did blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And you can think concepts in those terms at the front, of the paper. And if you've seen how like these papers like just have specific titles, so it's like, okay, master analog, and then it'll be like, there's the master, like it's very easy. And then social analog, blah blah blah, and then go. Or you could be like the first phase, and then it's like, okay, here was the message, here's what kind of message it was, here's how it fanned out, and here was the impact.
Even if it's not in like a terminus stage, could I be able to say like it's not reached at the moment? It's kind of, I guess, still in that. Yeah, because I was worried because like it's not completely like a dead thing, you know? So
Oh, absolutely. And you don't even need to, you can talk about those two stages technically, not in terms of Harry Styles, but you can say something just to show that you know like what comes next. You can say something that will
in the future we'll see how these fan out into.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. And then just because like since it's not like a fantasy thing, would I just say like, okay, the scene would be I know you mentioned like where people converge. I know it could be like concerts, yeah, because like certain events or whatnot, because there's not really like a fantasy element of it in a way. It's more like a real life thing.
Was he just wearing the pin?
Because he was wearing it on like a guitar strip, and then people saw it, and then like anything that these celebrities wear, like people seem to latch onto. So they kind of just went and ran with it and started like the fans kind of did it, and then I'm pretty sure, I'll have to check to make sure, but like then the opportunity was seen to be like, oh, they like this, let's make this into something, let's use this to our like thing to like create that in terms of like merchandise, marketing, promotion, little like fan project. And then the fans like also ran with it too, like this is a symbol of our community, this is our thing, this is our like shtick kind of.
I mean, it's just really one of those things that can explain that that Harry Styles had a vision.
That's why I think the cycle would be the best way to sort of go about it.
Google what Harry Styles thought about that. What he came to understand in terms of like why he put it, like when he had it on there. I mean, you don't put anything on as a celebrity and think that it's not going to get picked up, right? So he attention probably, and I'd be interested to see what the setting was for when they saw that. And then what you can talk about is that in turn, maybe he was doing that as like a non-verbal social analog. And in turn, the fans picked it up and created an entire new fantasy. And what you could talk about is then how the fans within each of those parts does it. So you don't have to concentrate so much on Harry, but you can talk about how the community continues to build it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can I run real quick? My computer's gonna die. Like you can talk to Valentina while I go get it.
And then I'm just gonna walk upstairs and I'm gonna go get Dylan and we're gonna talk. Valentina, thank you for your patience. Dylan, Rosie Posey, I love you so much. Thank you for your patience, honey. I'm gonna come up and I'm gonna make you some dinner, okay, my love? Dylan, okay, thank you, honey. All right, so I'm gonna come up here and just make some dinner while we're doing this. So for you, Valentina, until Laura comes to our return. Let me think two things here. 1 second. Let me get one. Dylan, how's red soup and a hot dog? Okay, sounds good to me too. All right, Valentina. Now I have a purpose, and thank you for just being with me in my home. And go.
I had a bunch of random ideas involving Survivor and some theories. The thing is, I don't know how well any of them really work. Like one that I had that's like kind of the same, but with different kind of aspects of Survivor. Like, for example, one of them was like a season is called like Heroes versus Villains. Right. So I could use like the social learning theory and like how that defines like kind of good and evil.
Yeah, and how people are told to like behave in competitive situations even. Absolutely. I mean, Heroes versus Villains also sets up It's just such a good one. It also sets up like about how we communicate about what good and bad is in terms of competition, and how we communicate that idea. So yeah, I think that would be like a really fun thing too. How are the heroes? How do the heroes like communicate, and how are those villains? So in that term, using that theory, talk to me about what you're like, why would you use that? Like, could you justify it as you would have to in your paper?
I guess like I guess the social learning theory is just like because it makes you like believe and behave in certain ways. So the way the show would kind of enforce like what good and evil are. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's it. Like, how do you start to get what's good and evil? So within that season, would you say that there was, how did you know who were the villains per se?
So it was like each tribe, like one was the heroes and one was villains, and they were like all past players. So depending on how they played in the past, they were defined as either a hero or a villain. And if they were like a villain, it was like they backstabbed a bunch of people, like that kind of thing.
Okay. And that's interesting because what could this could be? It's like almost like survivors telling you how to be perceived as a hero or a villain in competition. And I wonder how much that sets up like fans rooting for one another as well. But I think that the tenets of what makes you a hero or a villain could be very interesting to look at. It's like I'm trying to think of like how those ideas are reinforced, because it's not like they're coming back and they're showing you everything that those people did before. But how much do they talk about their previous behaviors? And in turn, that reinforces the idea that that is not correct, right? Because it's like, okay, heroes versus villains, great. But like in this season, are they communicating about their hero and villainness? Or is it simply that it's just
yeah, the more we talk about it, the more I realize it's not a great idea. Just based on the questions you're asking me, I'm realizing I can't answer them, but it doesn't fit.
right.
Yeah. The only other idea I had was like you mentioned like how like the formula is like sustained. Yeah, you look like you had an idea.
I was even thinking of like one season whereby there was like a leader of a tribe and how that person got them. Like if there was ever like a big, like, oh my gosh, this was like the most popular person ever. This is like the one that you know, there's so many characters that people like loved and did, you know, and like fallen for. I mean, Chad just watched, was it All Stars, whatever the last one was?
Winners at War.
Winners at War. Okay, there it was. And he was like, oh my gosh, it was so great. But like talking about everybody's like former character, you know, and I think that's it too. It's like the investment of how much we know these individuals. So there's something maybe that you would want to talk about in terms of how this formula works because of the familiarity and our connection to these people. They repeat them and they bring them back, you know, even as well. Oh, good, Dylan. I'm so glad. What was another one that you were thinking of?
Kind of, I guess, symbolic convergence theory in that way, or like a shared group fantasy, I guess, with like, because it's a reality show and like what we see is like they don't get a lot of food, they have to kind of compete for certain amenities, and like we think that like they're really roughing it, and they are, but it's not like that's their only option. Like if like they always have like they're not in actual danger is my point. And it's like kind of like how reality shows usually are, like they're showing something that the viewers want to see, but that's not actually really what's happening. I don't know.
Also include something about the rhetorical like visions in terms of like I haven't like my knowledge on Survivor is very limited, but like something about like what are they like going towards? Like I feel like a pragmatic would probably work there because you just have to get the job done to finish your tasks or do what's best for your team or something like that. I don't know. Just I live
Would a paper analyzing just like the she might be frozen.
Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Is it?
I hear a little bit.
I can't tell if she's frozen or not. I think she is.
I could just
Wait, are you both
like a
there?
little something.
Are you both there now? Or yeah.
Hi.
Okay, there we go.
Got it.
Go back. So Laura, working towards something. What is something that they have to work toward in Survivor?
I mean, don't they have like tasks to accomplish or something? Like doing whatever it
It's
takes.
mainly like the challenges that they have, whether it's like they're either working towards like a reward or they're working towards not voting someone out. But I guess what I was thinking was mainly like what a paper that just like analyzes the master analogs, like would that work? Just like that's it, that's the paper.
Oh yeah, again, like
Okay.
Yes, we're not going full research style. We don't need
Okay.
pages if you want to play just on that. Now the thing about doing those cycles, like I was talking about with Laura, and in terms of like Survivor, even if you wanted to, and that's something like in the grand scheme of like looking at the cycle, you could very easily mix that with a media perspective. So something about how like this cycle. So if you wanted to start out like with like how, because I'm even trying to think of like, hold on. So if you were going to do the cycles, would you want to talk about how Survivor because it would really need to talk about like how the idea and the fantasy and the popularity of it like really get moving, right? So like how have fans or how has that community continued? Or if you wanted to look at a particular episode and you wanted to talk about, let's say, how Boston Rob sustained power, you know, right? Like how his analog continued to continue. And then what was it where his analog left? What was the situation and setting and then ended and then he was voted out? Does that make sense? You could also look at it in like terms of like that these behaviors or characters must follow a specific pattern as well, or if they're found out, they can very easily be, it can end and it can go. So it really could be like about a player per se, and you could talk about their particular motivational strategies. You can watch it during an episode and then see how it goes and comes. And if you're familiar with it, it may not be as hard for you to do something like, I don't know if that makes sense. You know, you're seeing, would that be something that would work?
Like I was mainly thinking like if I choose like, I don't know if this is like too little, if I just like choose, let's say a season, and then I say this is how the social analog was portrayed, and this is how the pragmatic one, and this is how the righteous one, like would that, like just that, would that be?
Yeah, I would be specific on who,
okay,
and how that person used those and was able to get like everybody, you know what I mean? Because not everybody's going to be excited about a master analog. And so there's certain people that person has to know how to strategically do. And so how did they, or even like on Survivor, how did the character, you know, individual utilize those analogs in order to progress their game? And so like you could do something absolutely like that. Because if I was a character going on a TV show and a reality show, I'd want to know my best approach for my arguments in terms of like humanity, community, what works in a setting where you're like starving. I want to read it and get some information. So I think that one would be, hold on one second, a good one. Okay, love. Here. Oh, wait. Oh, okay.
Last thing.
Okay, do that last one.
Because I'm going to a new level right now.
A new level?
Yeah. Because I'm on my.
Oh, I'm so proud of you.
See, I just got this.
It's ABC Mouse. Much better. All right, here's this. I'm so proud of you. Why don't you go ahead and you can watch a little show whilst you eat this? And then I do want to stay up here, but I just need to go back in for like 10 minutes.
You can sit on the.
I could sit on the couch. Oh, is that your daddy? Nope. Okay. I'll go. Thanks, everybody. All right. And we're back to the dungeon. To the dungeon go. All right. Now, what was our other thought?
I think I'm okay. I think everything you gave, so I guess based on everything, all the information you've given me and all the ideas, I think choosing a particular player, probably ideally one that maybe only played once because that might make it easier on me, and how they used each of the tenets of the master analogs to progress their game.
It's great.
Okay.
That's a really fun thing to look at because they are going, I mean, it's progressing the game because people are going to buy into that idea. And so how do they then go and talk to other people about that same fantasy? And that's what buys in and gets them going. I mean, we can even think about that in like the strategies of like any strategies, I guess, on those specific shows. But I think that would be a fun way to do it. And you can also even claim that like because I'm even thinking about like social learning theory, right?
Yeah.
In the same idea, it's like how does social learning theory provide us with a playbook for survivor? Like, you know what I mean? Like an ideal survivor.
And like, I think I just have one last question because I think this idea just, I think it's a great basis and I know what to search up and like find information on now. When you said like how these analogs like progress them in the game and connects them to others, is it like how they're connected with like the other players in the show or how they are perceived by the audience as well?
Yeah, no, it would just be the players on the show.
Okay.
We're talking about like, oh, that Survivor, you want to talk about how Survivor's like fan base, like the group of community bought into this person and followed like and wanted them to win. Fantastic. But you can actually like the tangible evidence is going to come from those individuals of who follow along, because that's like the communication, right? Seeing how it actually works out in this environment.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, yay. And then Laura.
I'm gonna go now, but you guys can talk. Bye. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Please contact me the second that you're like, oh no, I need another. I'm right here.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, Laura. So we left one last thing. We were there, right?
Yeah, just like, I mean, it won't be too much longer, but just, yeah, about sort of like focusing more on the fan aspect and how like the fans sort of ran with it and
there we go.
This thing.
And I think that, yeah, so I think that would be a really fun, and even like, if you wanted me to, and I don't know if you want me to like do it like so, but it'd be like, right. think of it in this ways. This will be like the let's call it your so the body, this is what we want to look at. So if we were looking at in the body, and if you wanted to talk about the cycle, that's what we were talking about, right?
Sort of more towards the cycle, because I feel like that would be the best way to go for it, just because like in terms of how it's progressed from like a little tiny thing to like this big thing.
Setting started and it took off. So what you could do within each of those cycles is you could talk about the message, right? What type, like, or we were even, saying that, like if it's particular messaging or if it's in some specifics. The only thing you may want to do is talk about the vision, right? Because I wonder if the vision changes. Because
in terms of
we'll talk about, you're right, you want to talk about it in terms of fans, right?
I feel because I feel like both in terms of like how the artist took advantage of it and how the fans kind of ran with it too. Like it sort of went as like the artist had this little inconsequential thing, the fans sort of attached to it, then they realized something was there, so the artist also kept pushing it too.
It's almost like Harry Harry started it. It's almost like there's your rhetorical situation. The first cycle isn't Harry, it's the fans.
Yeah, that could be it too, because then it started like showing up a lot, then it's like, oh, I can do something with this.
And then Harry came back in modification. It's like something, you know what I mean? Like cycle 3 is where Harry actually like, oh, I should get on this, because they're running with it. So then now, so I think that would be a fun way. And again, rules are fluid in this by when you do those cycles. So like set it up, here's the situation, Harry, but how it started to progress was very unorthodox. It actually started with the fans, and he got back in, and then here's it going. And then you can talk about like the demise and so you could even make it like cheeky, like who knows how it will go. Will it be the fans or will it be Harry that like how it comes to the end? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I feel like right now I wouldn't say it's in the decline. If anything, I would just feel like it's just there. I feel like its peak could be considered the fact that on the second album it was like made into its own song, like as a tribute towards the fans, like its own little thing.
Yeah.
And then like, and still in the whole merchandise and the promote. I mean, now that I realize it, I'm literally wearing a sweater that has it, but like it's something like that where like it progressed. I wouldn't say it's in decline, but I would, like you said, I would mention like in the future, who knows like how this will turn out and continue developing and whatnot. Yeah, I feel like the idea is there. It's just, like I said, I might just be getting like very overwhelmed with myself, but then I just don't know how exactly to pinpoint it.
Overwhelmed with yourself, absolutely. And I do this. Well, I do the same thing, but that's because I have a bajillion thoughts at one time. So I really think that the best thing to do is to do a little outline first. Seriously, just like bullet point it, like, okay. And even if you followed, because you've already read these because you did them, but even if you went through your particular, where'd we go?
The sample essays in the book, do you mean? Yeah, because I looked at even one of them in particular because it was about sort of like a music band and how like they had a message and like how that I was looking at that and like it gave me somewhat of an idea. Of course, like you said, it's a lot more broader, so it talks about a whole bunch of other things, but there was something there about like how they originated something in terms of like a song lyric and how the fans ran with it and took it as to like that's a code between us, like how we identify ourselves.
There you go. Absolutely.
Yeah. So which I think could be applied even to this too.
Totally. It is such a code. It's absolutely just a way that they picked it. And that's even something, and I know that like we were talking about the cycles, but even if you want to do like the how'd they do it? Like the vision of kindness to others, the vision of kindness to yourself, the vision of kindness to the environment. Like, I'm not sure if there's any of those that he has started to play up on, but you can talk about how this Be Kind started, and then you can talk about he continued that vision, and how like those visions are ones that he puts out. So you can even go by the vision, you can go by the analog, you can go by the cycle. It just depends on how you want to organize it, but they can all like really hit the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's a good one. Like, I definitely like has given me more clarification on towards what to doing. Because yeah, that's a good point too. Because I know, I mean, the visions, of course, can be like pragmatic, social, whatnot. But I feel like I think there was something mentioned where like we kind of say like our own other visions that have been created by that. Like you mentioned, vision of kindness to others, to oneself. Like others, I guess I can add in towards like how.
Oh no.
Sort of element of it, how like doing that, like, doing outside charity work or stuff,
Yeah.
or even in terms of like to oneself, like how is that like a code, like how are we treating each other and one another in a group, like how does that create the group environment, what does that mean for us?
And I also wonder, and like timely, right? Like this, the time of it all, like when the Be Kind came out, and this is only for like the cycle. I hypothesize that the Be Kind has taken a back seat because of the political times that we are in. Because Be Kind, I feel like it was very much an emergence of like a bullying situation, right? So that's really where this Be Kind came out, like to be kind to others, be kind to others, treat others with dignity and respect, and how like Be Kind has really shifted to this idea of like equality and equity.
Yeah, because there is like even like at concerts, it's like yes, like that's the message, and also in terms of like always emphasizing the fact that like that scene like of where this is taking place, like this is a space of community, like everybody's accepted here. It's like a good like treat people with kindness, you know, like that sort of thing. So that could definitely be in terms of how that's developed.
Yeah, because how he builds that in, maybe even in concerts, like that's a great way that he speak it through. Like you're saying, the merch, it's right there on